Clapperboard 15-second hook, YouTube opening. Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, life just refuses to move forward? Like you're standing still while the world grows without you. This is the story of one ordinary person, one tiny seed, and a life-changing choice that proved it's never too late to grow. Part 1. Continuous narration. No headings. Daniel used to believe that growth was something that happened to other people. Not to him. Not anymore. At 34, his life felt like a room with no windows. Every morning looked the same, sounded the same, and felt heavier than the one before. He woke up before sunrise not because he was motivated, but because his mind refused to rest. The ceiling fan above his bed creaked as it turned, and he would stare at it, wondering when his life had quietly slipped into this loop of disappointment. He lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of a quiet American town, the kind of place where dreams either slowly matured or quietly died. For Daniel, it felt like the second one had happened. Once he had ambition. Once he had plans. He remembered being younger, telling people he would do something meaningful, something that mattered. Now he worked a job he didn't hate but didn't love either. It paid the bills, barely, and left him too exhausted to imagine anything more. Every day on his drive to work, he passed the same park. Trees lined the sidewalk, tall and steady, their branches stretching confidently toward the sky. Daniel rarely noticed them, but on that particular morning, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the early sunlight filtered through the leaves, or maybe it was the quiet ache in his chest that refused to be ignored. At work, his manager spoke about deadlines and performance, words that blurred together like background noise. Daniel nodded when expected, smiled when necessary, and did what he had always done, just enough. Inside, a voice whispered, "This is it. This is all your life will ever be." And for the first time, instead of arguing with that voice, he believed it. That evening, Daniel didn't go straight home. He parked near the park and sat in his car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He thought about all the choices he hadn't made, all the chances he had postponed. He told himself the same lie he had been repeating for years. It's too late now. Eventually, he stepped out of the car and walked into the park. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of grass and soil. Few people walked their dogs. A jogger passed by. Life, it seemed, was moving effortlessly for everyone else. Daniel sat on a wooden bench, his shoulders slumped. He pulled out his phone, scrolled mindlessly, then locked the screen again. He felt empty. Not sad in a dramatic way, just tired. Tired of hoping. Tired of failing. Tired of starting things he never finished. That's when he noticed the old man. The man was kneeling near a patch of soil beside the path, his hands covered in dirt. He wore a faded jacket and a baseball cap that had seen better days. Carefully, patiently, he pressed soil around something small in the ground. Daniel watched him without realizing why. Something about the slowness of the movement felt peaceful. After a few moments, the old man looked up and smiled. "Evening," he said. "Evening," Daniel replied, his voice flat. The old man stood up slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "You look like someone carrying a heavy load." Daniel almost laughed. Instead, he shrugged. "Just life." The man nodded, as if that explained everything. Life can feel heavy when we forget how it grows. Daniel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" The man gestured toward the soil. "I'm planting a seed." Daniel looked down. It was hard to believe something so small could matter. "Doesn't look like much." The man chuckled softly. "That's what most people say." Daniel hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I don't really believe in growth anymore. Feels like some people just miss their chance." The old man studied him for a moment, then reached into his pocket and held out a tiny seed. "This seed doesn't know how old you are. It doesn't care about yesterday. All it needs is the right choice today." Daniel stared at the seed resting in the man's palm. It looked fragile, insignificant, almost pointless. "And what choice is that?" Daniel asked. "To plant it." to water it, to show up for it every day, even when nothing seems to be happening. Daniel sighed. And if it never grows? The man smiled, eyes gentle. Then at least it didn't die wondering. Something about those words settled deep inside Daniel's chest. The old man pressed the seed into Daniel's hand. Plant something. Anything. Habit. Thought. Dream. Just don't leave the soil empty. Before Daniel could respond, the man picked up his tools and walked away, disappearing down the path as quietly as he had arrived. Daniel sat there long after the sun had dipped below the trees. He turned the seed over in his fingers. He didn't know why, but he slipped it into his pocket instead of throwing it away. That night, back in his apartment, Daniel placed the seed on the kitchen counter. He stood there, staring at it as if it might speak. A voice in his head said, "This is stupid." Another voice, quieter but steadier, said, "What if it's not?" He found an old pot on the balcony, filled it with soil, and planted the seed. It wasn't dramatic. No music played. No sudden clarity washed over him. But when he finished, he felt something unfamiliar. The next morning, Daniel woke up and checked the pot. Nothing. The soil. He almost smiled. Over the next few days, Daniel began to change in small, almost invisible ways. He woke up 10 minutes earlier. He stopped hitting snooze. He drank more water. He took a short walk every evening, stopping by the pot, watering it gently. Nothing grew. Weeks passed. Doubt crept in. "See, this is pointless," the old voice returned. But Daniel kept watering anyway. Not because he believed anymore, but because he had already started. One evening, exhausted from work, he stood on the balcony and almost skipped watering the soil. His hand hovered over the watering can. "It's just one day," he muttered. Then he remembered the old man's words. "Show up, even when nothing seems to be happening." Daniel watered the soil. The next morning, as sunlight touched the balcony, Daniel noticed something different. A tiny green sprout had pushed through the soil. It was small, fragile, easy to miss. But it was alive. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He knelt beside the pot, staring at the sprout as if it were a miracle. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in years. Growth doesn't announce itself loudly. It begins quietly, and it always starts with a choice. Part 2, continuous narration. No headings. Daniel stood there longer than he meant to, kneeling beside the small pot on his balcony, staring at the fragile green sprout as if it might disappear the moment he blinked. It was barely an inch tall, thin and delicate, yet it stirred something inside him that felt heavier than emotion. Felt like proof. Proof that effort, even quiet effort, left a mark. For a long time, he had believed that change only came in dramatic moments. Big decisions, bold risks, loud declarations. But this was different. This was small, almost invisible. And somehow, it felt more real than anything he had tried before. He reached out and touched the soil, careful not to disturb the sprout. "You actually grew," he whispered, his voice catching slightly. He wasn't talking to the plant alone. He was talking to himself. That day at work, Daniel noticed things he usually ignored. The way his coworkers laughed during lunch. The way sunlight streamed through the office windows in the afternoon. Even the sound of typing around him felt less suffocating. His problems hadn't disappeared. His job hadn't magically become his dream. But something had shifted inside him. A quiet thought followed him throughout the day. If something this small could grow, maybe I can too. That evening, he returned home and watered the plant again. He Googled how to care for seedlings, reading articles he never thought he would be interested in. He learned about patience, about roots forming underground long before anything appears above the soil. That line stayed with him. Roots grow in silence. It reminded him of his own life. All the years he felt like nothing was happening, like he was failing simply because no one could see progress. What if something had been growing inside him all along, unnoticed and unsupported. But hope, he quickly learned, is fragile. A few days later, work became overwhelming. Deadlines piled up. His manager criticized a report he had spent hours on. The old familiar weight returned, pressing against his chest. On his drive home, Daniel felt that same numbness creeping back. "This is pointless," he muttered. "One stupid plant doesn't change reality." When he reached his apartment, he didn't go to the balcony right away. He dropped his bag, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. The voice he knew too well spoke again. "You're fooling yourself. You always quit. Nothing really changes." Hours passed. The sky outside darkened. Daniel knew the plant needed water, but he didn't move. For the first time since he planted the seed, he chose comfort over consistency. The next morning, guilt hit him before his feet touched the floor. He rushed to the balcony, heart pounding as if he were checking on something alive, because he was. The sprout drooped slightly, the soil dry around it. "I'm sorry," he said softly, pouring water into the pot. The plant didn't magically perk up, just existed, fragile and quiet. And Daniel realized something uncomfortable. Neglect doesn't kill things instantly. It weakens them slowly. That truth didn't apply only to the plant. Over the next week, Daniel began to notice patterns in his own behavior. How easily he skipped things when he felt tired. How often he chose distraction instead of discipline. The plant became a mirror, reflecting his habits back at him without judgment. One night, while watering it, Daniel remembered the old man from the park. He wondered if he would ever see him again. More than that, he wondered if the man had known exactly what he was doing, placing something simple into the hands of someone who had complicated life with fear. As days turned into weeks, the plant grew stronger. Its stem thickened. New leaves appeared. And with each visible change, Daniel felt a subtle shift in himself. He began applying the same idea elsewhere. He started waking up 15 minutes earlier instead of 10. He used that time to stretch, to breathe, to sit quietly instead of scrolling on his phone. First it felt pointless, but he did it anyway. At work he spoke up once during a meeting. His voice shook slightly, but no one laughed. In fact, his manager nodded. That small moment replayed in Daniel's mind all day like a victory he hadn't expected. Still, progress wasn't linear. Some mornings, Daniel woke up feeling just as lost as before. Some nights, he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror and felt disappointed all over again. Growth, he realized, didn't erase doubt. Simply taught you how to move forward with it. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel returned to the park. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he hoped to see the old man again. Maybe he just needed to sit somewhere that felt alive. He walked the familiar path, passing trees that looked taller than before. Or maybe he was just paying attention now. Near the same spot where he had first seen the old man, Daniel noticed a small wooden sign stuck into the ground. It read, "Growth takes time. Please do not disturb." Daniel smiled. He sat on the bench watching families walk by, kids laughing, dogs pulling eagerly on their leashes. Life wasn't perfect for any of them. He knew that now. Everyone was growing something. Dreams, fears, hopes, often unseen. As he sat there, a memory surfaced. A younger version of himself, full of ideas, writing goals in a notebook he never finished. For years, that memory had brought pain. This time it brought something else. Compassion. "You didn't fail," Daniel whispered to himself. "You just stopped watering." That realization hit harder than regret ever had. When he returned home that evening, Daniel did something he had avoided for years. He opened his laptop and pulled out an old folder labeled Ideas. Inside were half-written plans, abandoned projects, unfinished dreams. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he picked one small thing. Just one. He worked on it for 20 minutes. When the timer ended, he stopped. No pressure. No guilt. Just progress. Days passed. The plant continued to grow. And slowly so did Daniel. He began to understand that choices weren't about huge life-altering decisions made once. They were about small moments repeated daily. Whether to water the plant, whether to show up, whether to believe effort mattered even when results were invisible. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Daniel stood on the balcony and noticed something new. The plant was strong now, its leaves open wide, reaching toward the light. It didn't hesitate. It didn't doubt. Simply grew toward what sustained it. Daniel leaned against the railing, letting the cool air fill his lungs. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like soil, waiting for whatever he chose to plant next. And though he didn't know it yet, the hardest test of his growth was still awe. Part 3, Continuous narration. No headings. The first real test came quietly, the way most difficult moments do. Not with an explosion, not with a warning, but with an email. Daniel was halfway through his morning coffee when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting nothing more than a routine notification. Instead, his stomach tightened. Position restructuring update. He opened the email slowly, reading each line as if his eyes were moving through water. The company was restructuring. Departments would be merged. Roles would change. Some positions would be eliminated. Daniel sat back in his chair, the familiar heaviness pressing into his chest. For years, he had lived with the quiet fear of instability, and now it stood in front of him again. The plant on the balcony, the early mornings, the small victories. Suddenly they all felt fragile. At work, the office buzzed with tension. Conversations dropped to whispers. People speculated, worried, refreshed their inboxes repeatedly. Daniel did the same, his focus fractured. By midday, his manager called him into a meeting room. The room was small, windowless. The kind of space where bad news often lived. "I'll be honest with you," his manager said, folding his hands on the table. "Your role is under review." Under review. Daniel nodded, pretending to be calm. He thanked her for being transparent. He walked back to his desk with steady steps, but inside, panic surged. The voice he thought he had quieted returned, louder than ever. "See, nothing is stable, this is why you shouldn't hope." That night, Daniel didn't water the plant. He stood on the balcony, watering can in his hand, staring at the leaves swaying gently in the breeze. His mind was elsewhere, calculating bills, imagining worst-case scenarios, replaying every mistake he had ever made. "What's the point?" he whispered. For the first time since the sprout had appeared, Daniel turned away. Days passed. The plant survived, but Daniel noticed small changes. The soil dried faster. The leaves lost some of their brightness. It wasn't dying yet, but it wasn't thriving either. Neither was he. Daniel withdrew. He skipped his morning routine. He stopped working on the small project he had started. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him, making every action feel pointless. He returned to old habits. Late nights, endless scrolling, avoidance. One evening, as he sat on the couch staring at the dark screen of his television, his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Hey, this is Mr. Harris from the park. Hope you're still growing." Daniel's breath caught. He stared at the message, unsure if it was real. He hadn't even remembered giving the old man his number. Yet there it was. "How did you get this number?" Daniel typed. The reply came a minute later. "You wrote it on the back of the seed packet. Thought you might need reminding someday." Daniel exhaled slowly. They met the next afternoon at the park. Mr. Harris sat on the same bench, hands resting on a cane. He looked older than Daniel remembered, but his eyes held the same calm clarity. "You look tired," Mr. Harris said gently. "I think I'm failing again," Daniel admitted. Mr. Harris nodded. "Growth doesn't stop when life gets hard. That's usually when it's tested." Daniel told him everything, the job uncertainty, the fear, the urge to give up. He spoke without filtering, surprised at how much he had been holding in. When he finished, Mr. Harris pointed toward a nearby tree. Its trunk was thick, bark scarred and uneven. "See that tree?" he asked. "Storms didn't make it weaker. They taught it how to hold on." Daniel followed his gaze. "But what if the storm breaks it?" "Then it grows again," Mr. Harris said. "Or something grows in its place. The only thing that truly stops growth is choosing not to try." Those words settled differently this time. Not as motivation but as truth. That night, Daniel watered the plant. Not with enthusiasm. Not with hope. Just with commitment. The next day, his manager called him in again. His role would change. Fewer hours. Less pay. It wasn't what he wanted, but it wasn't the end. Daniel walked home under a cloudy sky. Emotions tangled inside him. Fear was still there. But it wasn't alone anymore. Determination walked beside it. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He didn't wait to feel inspired. He worked anyway. 20 minutes became 40. 40 became an hour. Days turned into weeks. The plant recovered. New leaves appeared, stronger than before. And Daniel noticed something surprising. He was still scared. But he was no longer stuck. One evening, as he watched the plant reach toward the fading sunlight, Daniel realized growth wasn't about avoiding setbacks. It was about choosing again, every time life tried to pull you backward. And for the first time, he trusted himself to choose forward. Part 4. Continuous narration. No headings. The change didn't arrive all at once. Never did. It arrived the way the plant grew. Slowly, quietly, in ways that only became obvious when Daniel stopped to look back. With fewer hours at work, his days suddenly had open spaces in them. At first, those empty hours terrified him. Silence had always made his thoughts louder. But instead of filling the time with worry, he began treating it like soil, something that could either stay empty or be planted with intention. Every morning, Daniel watered the plant. Not as a ritual anymore, but as a reminder. He spoke to it sometimes, not because he expected an answer, but because it helped him hear himself. "Just show up today," he would say. And he did. He used his extra hours to learn. Slowly, patiently. He watched tutorials, read articles, practiced skills he had once believed were beyond him. He failed often. Some days ended with frustration so sharp it made his chest ache. On those days, the old voice tried to return. "You're wasting time. This won't lead anywhere." But Daniel had learned something important. Voices lose power when you don't argue with them. He let the doubt exist without letting it decide. Weeks passed. Then months. The plant grew taller. Its stem strong enough to hold its own weight. It needed a larger pot now, more space to stretch its roots. As Daniel carefully repotted it one afternoon, he felt an unexpected parallel. Growth required expansion. And expansion required discomfort. His own life reflected that truth. He applied for opportunities he once would have ignored. He reached out to people he had been too afraid to bother. Some didn't respond. Some said no. But a few said yes. One email, in particular, changed everything. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't promise success overnight. It was simply an invitation. A chance to contribute to a project aligned with something Daniel cared about. Something meaningful. His hands shook as he typed his reply. "Yes, I'd love to." The night before his first day, Daniel barely slept. Fear and excitement tangled together, impossible to separate. Standing on the balcony at dawn, he looked at the plant glowing softly in the early light. "We're doing this," he said. The work was challenging. It pushed him in ways he hadn't expected. There were moments he felt exposed, unsure, painfully aware of everything he still didn't know. But there were also moments, small, quiet moments when he felt alive. For the first time in years, effort felt purposeful. One evening, Daniel returned to the park. He hadn't planned to. His feet simply carried him there. The trees stood tall, their branches fuller now, leaves whispering in the breeze. Mr. Harris sat on the same bench. "You look different," the old man said. Daniel smiled. I feel different. They walked together slowly, Daniel telling him about the changes, the fears, the progress. Mr. Harris listened without interruption. Growth doesn't mean life gets easier, Mr. Harris said. It means you get stronger. Daniel nodded. As they parted, Mr. Harris placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Remember, keep choosing. Even when it's hard. Especially then. That night, Daniel stood on his balcony, looking at the plant. No longer small, no longer fragile. It had weathered neglect, drought, uncertainty. And it had grown anyway. So had he. For the first time, Daniel didn't ask himself if he could grow. He knew he already was. Final part. Continuous narration. No headings. The realization came on an ordinary morning. Daniel stood on his balcony, coffee in one hand, watering can in the other. The city below was waking up. Cars moving, distant voices, life unfolding in its usual rhythm. But something inside him felt still, grounded in a way it never had before. The plant stood tall now. Its leaves were wide and healthy, catching the sunlight with quiet confidence. It wasn't perfect. Some edges were uneven. A few leaves bore marks from days when water had come late or storms had passed through. Yet it was strong. Beautifully strong. Daniel smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. For years he had believed growth was loud, that it arrived with applause, recognition, and sudden success. But standing there, he understood the truth. Growth is silent. Growth is patient. Growth is a choice made again and again, even when no one is watching. Life hadn't turned into a fairy tale. He still had responsibilities. Uncertainty still existed. Fear still visited from time to time. But fear no longer controlled the story. It was just a character passing through. Later that day, Daniel received a message confirming something he once would have thought impossible. The project he had poured his effort into, day after day without guarantees, had opened a new door. Not a final destination, just another step forward. And that was enough. That evening, Daniel returned to the park one last time before the season changed. The air was cooler now. Leaves crunched beneath his feet. He sat on the same bench where everything had begun, the memory vivid in his mind. He looked around at the trees, tall, rooted, unbothered by how long they had taken to grow. I get it now, he whispered. He thought of the man he used to be, the one who believed it was too late, that missed chances could never be replaced. He felt compassion for that version of himself, not disappointment. You weren't broken, he said quietly. You were just waiting to be watered. Daniel stood and walked home under the fading sky. On his balcony, he placed the plant gently where it could catch the moonlight. He didn't know how tall it would grow. He didn't need to, because the lesson had already taken root inside him. Life doesn't change in one moment. Changes in the moments you choose not to give up. In the days you show up tired. In the small decisions that feel insignificant but aren't. Every choice is a seed. What you water today is what grows tomorrow. And no matter how long you've waited, no matter how many seasons you think you've missed, it is never too late to grow. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Your life is not over just because it feels slow right now. Growth doesn't ask how old you are or how many times you've failed. It only asks one question. Will you choose again today? If you're feeling stuck, tired, or unsure, take this story as a sign. Start small. Stay patient. Keep going. Because the seed you plant today can change your entire tomorrow. Thank you for listening, and don't forget, you are still growing.